You're watching the Legal Breakdown. Glenn, of course, we are following the major news that Donald Trump has deployed the National Guard to Washington, D.C., obviously a harbinger of things to come more broadly across the nation. But I want to put a tweet from Ken Delaney from MSNBC right up here on the screen. The news out of the D.C. mayor's press conference is that her lawyers apparently do not believe they have grounds to challenge President Trump's declaration of a D.C. crime emergency. The city appears to be surrendering to a federal takeover of its police department. So first and foremost, Glenn, can you speak on the fact that a city is not able to mount a defense from a federal takeover of the U.S. government? It seems so wholly antithetical to the basic constitutional structure of this country. Can I just have your general reaction to what we've just read?
Brian, I didn't see that one coming. And when I say that one, I didn't think Mayor Bowser and the D.C. city government, which has fought so hard for home rule, to be able to, govern itself, and home rule has been in place now for decades. I didn't think in a million years they would just lay down and let the Trump administration walk all over them, including seizing control of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. Those are the city cops. They work for the city of the District of Columbia, not the federal government. So I will say that sending National Guard troops into the streets of Washington, D.C., as horrific as that is, it does seem that the president has the authority to do that. He can't send troops into the 50 states without the governor's buy-in. Of course, we know he also violated that law as well out in California, but he actually does seem to be lawfully entitled to send National Guard troops into D.C. because D.C. is not a state. It doesn't have a governor, and the prevailing wisdom in the legal authority seems to suggest that, if the president wants to activate the National Guard and send them into the streets of D.C., he can. But the really surprising part is his seizing control of the local law enforcement organization, the Metropolitan Police Department. And he has to be able to, in a straight-faced way, claim a state of emergency in order to do that. And I thought, for sure, Mayor Bowser would push back. I assumed that there were going to be motions for temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions being, drafted as we speak and filed probably by close of business today. And yet, according to Ken Delaney's tweet or post, that seems not to be the case. So there are certainly some takeaways. Now, Brian, that doesn't mean that the MPD's police union won't file a challenge. I don't really know how it works when one day you're working for the D.C. city government and your check is being cut by the D.C. city government, and now you're under federal control. Does that make you a federal employee? Does that impact by whom you're paid? Does it impact your benefits? Does it impact your work assignments? I mean, all of this, I think, is a recipe for disaster. But here's another important takeaway. And when I was watching the press conference where, the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, was boasting and bragging about how, crime is down on all fronts, violent crime is down. And yet Donald Trump in the next breath is announcing a state of emergency because crime is out of control.
Right.
These are the kind of things you would think would give rise to some pretty consequential legal challenges. But here's what people need to now keep in mind. Every single crime that is committed in Washington, D.C. from today moving forward is on the hands and on the head of the Trump administration. And let's face it, at this press conference, they announced crime stops today. Yeah, well, let's hold them to that and see if crime actually stops today in the District of Columbia.
Well, Glenn, of course, you must know that if crime goes down, then Trump gets credit. But if crime goes up, then Trump doesn't deserve any of the credit. That would be Joe Biden's crime.
Yeah, isn't it wonderful that we've gone from a country where a president said, the buck stops with me, to a president who says, I don't take any responsibility at all.
Yeah. Glenn, it's worth asking here, is this a capitulation by the mayor of Washington, D.C.? Do you think that it's well-founded for her not to try and seek injunctions or temporary restraining orders? I mean, what can we read into the decision not to fight this thing with the full force? Or is it just the fact that she thinks it would be a doomed effort by virtue of the fact that maybe there's not enough legal standing for her to actually fight back?
the D.C. city government has a lot of really good lawyers, and I have to believe, Brian, they made a good faith assessment of not only the evidence, but the arguments that they would make in court if they wanted to oppose Donald Trump's invocation of a state of emergency in D.C. and seize control of the local police department. And they probably decided that they don't have a strong enough argument to make, and they don't want to undertake, a failed attempt to resist, the president's federal takeover of the D.C. police force. So, I'm going to project good faith onto their decision and say it was a fact and law-based decision. But there are a couple other things that our viewers should keep in mind. The D.C. Home Rule Act, the law that governs emergency control of the D.C. police by the President of the United States, has some time limits to, the president's ability to retain control over the local police force. For example, it says, the law says, whenever the President of the United States determines that special conditions of an emergency nature exist, which require the use of the Metropolitan Police Force for federal purposes, he may direct the mayor to provide him, and the mayor shall provide, such services of the Metropolitan Police Force as the president may deem necessary and appropriate. But Brian, during that 48-hour time period, if Donald Trump makes a written request of Congress to extend the time that he has to control the Metropolitan Police Department, the statute reads that Senate and House of Representatives must enact into law a joint resolution authorizing the extension of federal control of the local police department. So there are some legal constraints, deadlines, and requirements put on Trump's ability to retain control of MPD. Now, will Donald Trump blow right through those as well, or will he honor them? Well, we will know within 48 hours whether he's taken the first step to try to extend his control of the Metropolitan Police Department.
Glenn, is this a regular law that they'll have to pass? And basically what I'm getting at here is, do we need a simple majority of the House, and then do we need to exceed the 60-vote threshold in the Senate? Because he'll get simple majorities in both houses of Congress, but he's not going to be able to get the requisite 60 votes that he needs in the Senate, because that will require a number of Democratic senators to cross over.
Brian, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this topic, but when I read that, it requires a joint resolution that is passed into law, at least the plain reading of that language seems to suggest that there is no requirement that there be 2/3 or a supermajority. It sounds like it will probably be a simple majority vote passing the resolution into law. But again, I will defer to people who know more about, political ins and outs of the workings of Congress than I do.
I mean, in theory, is this whole thing just regarding 48, is he doing all of this just so that he can have control of the Metropolitan Police Department for 2 days?
If he cares about the law, that is his first deadline, right? Within 48 hours, he has to provide written notice to Congress of the reasons for the state of emergency and its continued necessity. And then these other timeframes will kick in after that, and he gets basically 30 days. So we'll see what he does within the next 48 hours.
Well, look, I actually don't think that the primary purpose of this is to tackle crime. Because, look, if he was interested in crime, he would go to Memphis, Tennessee, right? He would go to Little Rock, Arkansas. He would go to a raft of other, St. Louis, Missouri. But he won't go there because they're red cities or red states, and it's easier for him to exert his power over Washington, D.C. But I think more broadly, this is not necessarily about quelling crime. I think that the whole point of this exercise is to normalize Americans to the idea of American troops taking over American cities right now, when there's not really anything happening, so that when we're close to an election and he needs boots on the ground to be able to carry out his plans, like seizing voting machines, which is what he tried to do back in 2020, Now, it won't seem as crazy because we've already gotten used to it. We've seen troops come into Los Angeles. We've seen troops get deployed into Washington, D.C. We'll certainly see troops get deployed into other American cities, as has been previewed by Trump, where he mentioned Chicago, he mentioned New York, of course, all of these blue bastions in blue states. And so when he wants to get some muscle, basically, to be able to carry out his plans, these are the people that he's going to use. And if he's able to kind of normalize us to this idea, to get us accustomed to this idea that, yeah, American troops just take over American cities, that's just how it goes, then there won't be so much pushback when he tries to do it at a moment that's more politically convenient, politically advantageous for him.
Brian, I couldn't agree with you more. I heard some reporting earlier today that D.C. doesn't even crack the top 25 most violent cities in America per capita. So no, this is not about fighting crime in D.C. It's about militarizing the streets of the United States of America, because I believe his goal will ultimately be getting enough military members deployed to the streets of America to tamp down the chaos that Donald Trump largely creates, so he can declare martial law, invoke the Insurrection Act, in the run-up to the midterms, and then say, well, there's so much chaos that I think we're going to need to postpone the midterm elections, which will actually translate to canceling the midterm elections. I think that has been his play for a very long time. His goal is to somehow undermine the midterm elections so he doesn't run the risk of losing control of the House of Representatives. And then secondarily, Brian, I think this is also the mother of all distractions, coming on a day when a federal court judge in New York just completely tore the head off, figuratively speaking, of Donald Trump's DOJ, specifically Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, and Jay Clayton, 3 political appointees who signed off on the motion litigating the release of the grand jury transcripts in the Epstein and Maxwell cases. And the judge denied the motion and took them to task for being, among other things, false, misleading, trying to distract the American people, and giving the illusion of transparency. That is just some of the choice quotes of today's devastating, scathing ruling by a federal court judge. So this is more of an attempt to distract from, what is still the biggest scandal in America these days in the minds of the American people, particularly in the minds of the MAGA base that are clamoring for the release of the Epstein files, and that is the Trump-Epstein-Maxwell scandal.
Well, look, I think it's especially important right now as we get closer and closer to Trump really executing these plans in midterms to be clear-eyed about the threats that are in front of us. I know that we're not going to see it from legacy media. I know that they're going to continue taking their cues from Republicans and right-wing media and the Trump administration. So again, that just underscores the need for us to be as clear-eyed as possible when talking about this stuff. For those who are watching right now, if you appreciate our reporting and if you want to support our work completely free, please subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. It doesn't cost you anything to do so, but it's a great way to support independent media and our work specifically. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.